The lobby of Carter Enterprises gleamed like a palace. Polished marble floors reflected the light of an enormous crystal chandelier that hung above, while employees in crisp suits hurried about with tablets and files in their hands. The atmosphere was one of power, prestige, and precision. Yet, in the far corner of this glittering corporate world, bent over a mop and bucket, was David Miller. His uniform was faded, the name tag nearly illegible from years of use, and his hands rough from countless hours of scrubbing floors. Despite the weariness in his eyes, David worked with quiet dignity, never complaining, never asking for pity. His only thought was to finish the shift quickly so he could return home to his teenage son, Sam, who had been unwell that morning. David had woken before dawn to check on Sam, whose fever had not broken during the night. He made sure his son had water, placed a cool cloth on his forehead, and whispered words of encouragement before leaving reluctantly for work. That small delay cost him precious minutes, and by the time he arrived at the office building, he was 10 minutes late. Normally no one would notice, but today was different. Today, the billionaire owner himself was in the building. Ethan Carter was not a man easily missed. Tall, sharp-featured. Dressed in a tailored suit that probably cost more than David's entire yearly salary, he exuded authority. He was a man who had built his empire on precision and discipline, and he despised weakness of any kind. As he entered the lobby with his entourage of assistants, his eyes immediately fell on David, who was rushing to set up his cleaning cart. Ethan's steps slowed, and the employees nearby froze, sensing trouble. "You're late." Ethan's voice cut through the air like a blade, sharp and unforgiving. Heads turned, conversations halted, and suddenly all eyes were on the janitor. David straightened, gripping the mop handle to steady his trembling hands. I apologize, sir," he stammered, lowering his gaze. "My son was sick this morning, and Ethan raised a hand, silencing him with a cold glare. "Excuses," he snapped. His voice grew louder, echoing across the lobby. "This is the problem with people like you, always an excuse. You are paid to show up on time, to do your job, not to bring your personal failures into my building." The words dripped with disdain, each syllable meant to wound. David's face burned with humiliation, but he held his tongue. He had learned long ago that arguing with men like Ethan only brought more trouble. Yet in that moment, another presence entered the lobby. Sam, pale but determined, had come to surprise his father with lunch. He stood near the revolving doors, clutching a paper bag in his hands, and he heard every cruel word. His heart pounded as he watched his father shrink under the billionaire's glare, his shoulders heavy with shame. To Sam, his father was the hardest-working, most honorable man alive. To see him insulted so mercilessly was like a blade through his chest. "Look around you," Ethan continued, gesturing at the grandeur of the building. "Do you think this empire was built on excuses? Do you think success comes from being weak? From being late? From being ordinary?" He sneered, his eyes narrowing. "You should be grateful you're allowed to clean these floors." The silence that followed was deafening. Employees shifted uncomfortably, some pitying David, others too afraid to intervene. David lowered his head, swallowing his pride like bitter medicine. He wanted to defend himself, to explain, to cry out that he worked harder than anyone else in this building. But he stayed quiet, because speaking might cost him the little income that kept his son alive. From across the room, Sam's hands clenched around the paper bag. His father did not deserve this humiliation. He saw the tears threatening at the corners of David's eyes, hidden quickly with a blink, and something fierce ignited inside him. In that instant, Sam made a silent vow. One day, he would stand tall in front of men like Ethan Carter. One day, he would prove that worth was not measured in money, and that respect was not bought with power. What Sam didn't notice was that another pair of eyes had been watching as well. Isabella Carter, Ethan's daughter, had lingered on the mezzanine above, observing the entire scene. Unlike her father, she saw not weakness in the janitor and his son, but quiet strength and a spark of determination that glowed brighter than any diamond in the chandelier. As Ethan strode away, satisfied with his display of dominance, Isabella's gaze remained fixed on Sam. Something told her that this boy's story was far from over and that his next move might change everything. The opportunity The humiliation in the lobby lingered long after the echoes of Ethan Carter's voice faded from the marble walls. David returned to his work in silence, his head lowered, while Sam quietly placed the lunch bag on a chair and slipped out before his father could see the pain in his eyes. That night, in their small apartment on the edge of the city, father and son ate in silence. The room was dim, the hum of the old refrigerator the only sound between them. Sam picked at his food, his mind replaying the billionaire's words again and again, each insult like a nail driven deeper into his pride. Finally, he broke the silence. "Dad," he said softly, his voice heavy with both sadness and determination, "he doesn't get to talk to you like that. You're the hardest working man I know. If he can't see that, then he's blind." David gave a weary smile, lines of exhaustion etched into his face. "Son, people like Ethan Carter, they see the world through money. To them, if you're poor, you're invisible or worse, worthless. But don't carry that bitterness with you. You're different. You've got a chance to be more." Sam leaned forward, his eyes bright despite the frustration burning in them. "Then I will. I'll show him one day that people like us matter. I'll prove him wrong." David reached across the table and gripped his son's hand. "You don't need to prove anything to him. Just prove it to yourself." Yet even as he said it, a flicker of hope sparked in his chest. Maybe, just maybe, Sam could rise above the cage of poverty that had trapped David his whole life. The following week, posters began appearing on the notice boards around Carter Enterprises and local schools. Bold letters announced, "Carter Foundation. Annual Scholarship Program, Changing Lives Through Education." The program, created years ago in Ethan's late wife's honor, offered full scholarships to prestigious schools for students who demonstrated not just academic excellence, but also resilience and creativity. It was the kind of opportunity that could change everything for a boy like Sam. When Sam first saw the notice, his heart raced. The idea of competing terrified him. Students from wealthy families, armed with tutors and resources, would be participating. What chance did he have with only second-hand textbooks and a few hours of study squeezed between chores? But then he thought of the scene in the lobby, his father shrinking under Ethan's insults, and the fire in his chest reignited. This was it. This was the moment to stand tall, to fight back not with anger but with brilliance. At dinner that night, Sam slid the flyer across the table. "Dad," he said, trying to keep his voice steady, "I want to enter this competition." David picked up the paper, adjusting his glasses to read the words. His heart tightened. "Sam, this isn't easy. The competition is fierce. These kids have everything: private tutors, the best schools, money for resources." He sighed deeply. "I don't want to see you hurt." But Sam's eyes gleamed with determination. "Dad, I've been solving math problems from books 3 grades ahead of me. I built a working model of a wind turbine from scrap parts. I can do this. I just need a chance." David studied his son's face, the fire there so different from the quiet resignation he often saw in the mirror. For a moment, he hesitated, fearing the sting of disappointment for his boy. But then he nodded. "If this is what you want, then I'll stand by you." Always, the next day, Sam submitted his application. When Ethan Carter reviewed the list of participants, his eyes narrowed at the name. "Samuel Miller?" He scoffed, recognizing the surname instantly. "The janitor's boy?" He let out a derisive laugh, startling the assistant beside him. What a waste of time. Kids like him don't belong in a competition like this. Unbeknownst to Ethan, Isabella Carter was within earshot. She frowned, her heart tightening at her father's cruelty. She had met Sam briefly in the lobby, and she hadn't forgotten the intelligence in his eyes when he explained a complex math problem she had been struggling with. He had spoken with such clarity and confidence, without arrogance, and she had been both surprised and impressed. Now, hearing her father dismiss him so callously, she felt an unexpected surge of defiance that evening. Isabella sent Sam a message through the scholarship program's online forum. "Don't let anyone tell you that you don't belong. If you've got the talent, fight for it. I believe you can do it." When Sam read the message, his heart lifted. Someone believed in him, someone from the very world that had tried to push him down. It was all the encouragement he needed. From that moment, every spare second was devoted to preparation. He pored over borrowed books, solved problem after problem late into the night, and built small inventions from discarded parts to sharpen his creativity. His father, despite aching bones and long shifts, stayed awake beside him, quizzing him, cheering him on, making sacrifices silently so his son could keep reaching higher. The world might have seen them as poor and insignificant, but in that tiny apartment they were building something stronger than money, determination, courage, and an unshakable bond. And while Ethan Carter laughed at the thought of a janitor's son daring to compete with the elite, he had no idea that the boy he mocked was already preparing to change everything. Rising against odds, the day of the first round of the Carter Foundation scholarship competition arrived with an air of tense anticipation. The grand hall of the city's most prestigious academy had been transformed into an arena of intellect. Students from the wealthiest families filed in, their designer backpacks slung casually over their shoulders, parents whispering instructions about composure and confidence. They carried with them not just years of elite schooling, but the unshakable assurance that they belonged here. And then there was Sam Miller, dressed in a neatly ironed second-hand shirt, clutching a worn notebook filled with scribbled equations and ideas. He stood out immediately, a symbol of the world outside the academy's golden gates. But he held his head high, remembering the vow he had made, to prove that dignity and brilliance did not come with a price tag. As the exam papers were handed out, murmurs rippled across the room. The problems were notoriously difficult mathematical puzzles that required both sharp logic and creative thinking. Students hunched over their papers, brows furrowed in concentration. Sam scanned the questions, and though his heart raced, he began to write with steady confidence. He remembered the countless nights spent hunched over a flickering lamp, solving advanced problems from textbooks others had discarded. He remembered his father's voice, encouraging him to keep going even when exhaustion threatened to pull him under. Question after question, he worked methodically, his pencil flying across the page. By the end of the test, whispers began spreading among the proctors. "That boy in the back." "He finished early," one remarked in disbelief. Some of the wealthier students scoffed, assuming he had given up. But when the results were posted a week later, it was Sam's name that blazed across the top of the leaderboard, above the children of bankers, politicians, and even Ethan Carter's close associates. The janitor's son had not only passed, he had outshined them all. The news sent ripples through the city. Teachers at Sam's modest public school cheered. Parents whispered about the brilliant boy from nowhere. And for the first time, David walked into work with a spark of pride hidden in his weary eyes. But in the towering offices of Carter Enterprises, the reaction was far less celebratory. Victor Hayes, Ethan's longtime business partner, read the headlines with narrowed eyes. A man who thrived on control and appearances, Victor despised the idea of a poor boy disrupting the carefully curated image of the Carter Foundation. "It's dangerous," he muttered to Ethan in his office. "This janitor's boy becoming the face of your scholarship? What will donors think? That we're wasting resources on the undeserving?" His words dripped with disdain. Ethan leaned back in his chair, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "It's amusing, I'll admit, but it won't last. These kids from the bottom, they shine for a moment, then reality crushes them. Let him enjoy his little victory. The finals will break him." What Ethan didn't realize was that his daughter, Isabella, had been quietly following Sam's progress with growing admiration. She had seen the scores herself and even overheard her classmates talking about how Sam had explained concepts better than their private tutors. While her father dismissed him, Isabella felt a stirring of hope. Perhaps this boy was proof that brilliance could come from anywhere. That worth was not confined to wealth. Meanwhile, Sam doubled down on his preparation. He knew the road ahead would not be easy. The competition only grew tougher, and whispers of doubt followed him everywhere. Some of the other contestants mocked him openly, sneering at his worn shoes and his simple clothes. "Enjoy your 15 minutes, one of them jeered. "Next round will send you back to cleaning floors like your dad." Those words cut deep. but they also fueled the fire within him. Every insult became a reason to push harder. His father, though exhausted, spent evenings sitting beside him, quizzing him from old books, his tired voice filled with unwavering pride. Neighbors, too, began to notice the boy's determination. Some offered him old study guides, others lent him internet time to do research. Slowly, the community that had often been overlooked rallied around him, investing their hopes in his success. And so, against all odds, Sam advanced through round after round. His ideas impressed judges, his resilience inspired spectators, and his name began to circulate beyond the competition halls. Newspapers wrote about the janitor's son challenging the elite. To many, he became a symbol of possibility. To others, especially Victor Hayes, he became a threat that needed to be stopped. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the city skyline, Victor cornered Ethan in his office. "This boy is becoming a problem," he hissed. "If he wins, it undermines everything. Donors want prestige, not pity cases. We need to deal with him now." Ethan frowned, torn between his partner's warnings and the faint flicker of curiosity. He felt about the boy who refused to fail, but pride won over empathy, and he gave a cold nod. "Do what you must. Just make sure the Miller boy learns his place." And so the stage was set. While Sam celebrated his victories with quiet dignity, forces more powerful than he realized were already moving against him. What none of them knew, however, was that this poor boy, armed only with determination and courage, was about to face trials that would test not just his intelligence but his very spirit. The smear campaign, then the higher Sam climbed in the scholarship competition, the sharper the knives against him became. For weeks, he had silenced the doubters with each round he passed, but power is not easily challenged, and men like Victor Hayes were not about to let a janitor's son become a symbol of triumph. Victor believed in order, in control, in keeping the poor where they belonged on the margins, invisible and silent. And so, when Sam's name began appearing in headlines as the boy genius from the slums, Victor decided to act. He began quietly, with whispers to journalists he had in his pocket. Stories appeared in the business pages, questioning whether Sam's sob story was being exploited for attention. Soon the narrative twisted darker. Reporters appeared outside the Miller's small apartment building, snapping photos of peeling paint and broken staircases, framing it as evidence of neglect. Old debts that David had long since paid off resurfaced in articles, painted as proof of financial irresponsibility. Worst of all, Victor dredged up a rumor from years before, when David had been accused falsely of stealing cleaning supplies from another job. Though he had been cleared, the accusation was enough for Victor to spin into a headline. "Can a janitor with a shady past raise a scholarship hero?" The effect was immediate and devastating. At work, colleagues, who had once pitied David, now eyed him with suspicion. Parents of other competitors began murmuring that Sam was undeserving, that his success was tarnished by the shadow of scandal. On social media, strangers who knew nothing of their lives hurled insults. "Scammer family. Just using the rich for pity. Trash can't be turned into treasure." Sam felt the weight of it crushing down on him. Walking to school, he heard the whispers. In the cafeteria, he saw the sneers. Even his teachers, who had once celebrated his victories, grew distant, afraid of attaching themselves to a boy now tainted by controversy. Each insult felt like a stone hurled at his spirit, but the worst was seeing his father bear the brunt of it. David, who had worked himself to the bone his entire life with nothing but honesty in his pocket, walked with his shoulders heavier, his eyes clouded by humiliation he did not deserve. One evening, Sam found his father sitting silently at the small kitchen table, staring at an old photo of Sam as a child. His calloused hands trembled as he tried to hide the newspaper folded beside him, the headline screaming accusations. Sam sat down quietly and placed his hand over his father's. "Dad," he whispered, "it's all lies. They don't know you." David swallowed hard, his voice low. "It doesn't matter what's true, son. In their world, truth bends to money. They can buy the story." Those words lit a spark in David's weary soul. He straightened, a faint glimmer of the man who had carried their lives on his back returning to his eyes. "You're right," he murmured. "We may be poor, but we are not small. They can take everything from us, but they can't take who we are." From that night forward, father and son braced themselves against the storm. Sam continued his preparations with renewed determination, even as the media tore at his reputation. David, refusing to cower, held his head higher at work, daring anyone to look him in the eye. And in the shadows, Isabella Carter watched, her admiration deepening as she saw the strength that neither lies nor wealth could extinguish. Meanwhile, Victor pressed harder, convinced the smear would crush Sam before the finals. What he didn't realize was that adversity had never broken the boy it had built him. Each cruel headline, each whisper of doubt, became fuel for a fire that would blaze even brighter when the moment of truth arrived. The smear campaign had been designed to silence him, to make him bow his head like his father had been forced to do in the lobby weeks before. But Sam was not his father. He had inherited David's dignity, yes, but he also carried within him a defiance born of youth and dreams unbroken. And with the finals looming, he knew he would not simply compete, he would stand before the world and make them see the truth. They had tried so hard to bury. The final showdown, the day of the scholarship finals, arrived like a storm rolling over the city, heavy with anticipation and charged with tension. The grand auditorium of Carter Enterprises had been transformed into a stage of reckoning, its polished wooden floors gleaming under the golden chandeliers. Rows of donors, journalists, and influential guests filled the seats, their eyes sharp and expectant. This was more than just an academic contest. It had become a spectacle, a narrative of prestige, wealth, and reputation. For most of the competitors, it was a chance to polish the shine of their already privileged futures. For Sam Miller, it was everything. It was dignity, justice, and a chance to prove that brilliance could grow even in the cracks of poverty. Sam stood backstage, gripping his worn notebook. His shirt, though carefully ironed by his father that morning, could not hide the difference between him and the other contestants, who adjusted their tailored jackets and whispered confidently about their tutor's last-minute tips. He felt the weight of their glances, the sneers of those who still whispered the lies spread by Victor Hayes, but he kept his chin up. His father's words rang in his ears like a drumbeat. "We may be poor, but we are not small." When the first contestants took the stage, they dazzled with polished presentations, perfect diction, expensive props, and rehearsed charm. The judges nodded politely, impressed but not moved. Then, when Sam's name was called, a hush fell over the room. All eyes turned as the janitor's son walked slowly across the vast stage, notebook in hand, no grand display, no entourage, just a boy carrying the weight of both his father's sacrifices and his own. Unshakable will, the challenge was revealed, a complex problem blending mathematics, engineering, and creativity. Contestants had to design a solution to bring clean energy to underserved communities, a task that required not only intellect but vision. Murmurs spread through the audience. Surely this was where the poor boy would falter, for what could he know of engineering when he had no laboratories, no expensive equipment? But Sam smiled faintly because the challenge was his strength. Nights spent tinkering with scrap metal. In the corner of their apartment, afternoons salvaging broken fans and motors from junkyards, those moments had taught him more than any textbook. As he began to speak, his voice was steady, clear, and filled with conviction. "I don't have access to laboratories or expensive models," he began, his gaze sweeping the audience. "But I know what it means to live in a place where light is a luxury and electricity is unreliable. I built this." He lifted a small, crude model of a wind turbine pieced together from recycled parts. "Not from wealth, but from necessity. It is proof that innovation does not need privilege. It needs imagination. If a boy like me with nothing can create this, then imagine what communities could do if we invested in them, not ignored them." The judges leaned forward, murmurs rippling through the hall. Sam continued, explaining the mechanics, the math behind the turbine, the efficiency it could bring to low-income neighborhoods. His explanation was precise, but it was his passion that filled the room. He wasn't simply solving a problem. He was living the problem and offering a vision born from survival. When he finished, a silence stretched across the auditorium. Then, as if compelled by something greater than protocol, applause erupted, not polite clapping, but a roar of admiration. Donors stood, journalists scribbled furiously, and even the judges exchanged astonished looks, but Sam wasn't done. He set the model aside, stepped closer to the microphone, and spoke from his heart. "My father was humiliated in this very building," he said, his voice trembling but unflinching. Gasps echoed in the audience as heads turned toward Ethan Carter, seated in the front row. "He was called worthless because he is poor. I am his son. Everything I have learned, every ounce of strength I carry, comes from him. Poverty is not shameful. Arrogance is. My father taught me that dignity cannot be taken away by insults, and today I stand here not just for him, but for every child who has been told they are less because they were born with less." The crowd was stunned. Some wiped tears, others clapped again, louder this time, their admiration for the boy uncontainable. Isabella Carter, seated among the guests, felt her chest swell with pride. She looked at her father, whose face was pale, his jaw tight, as though each of Sam's words were arrows piercing the armor of his arrogance. Ethan Carter, who had mocked the janitor's son, who had dismissed him as nothing, now sat in silence. As the boy stood tall on his stage, the applause of the world echoing around him. And in that moment, the billionaire felt something he had not known in years, not control, not power, but humility. For the first time, he questioned whether the true wealth in that room belonged not to him, but to the boy whose voice had just shaken the foundations of everything he believed, redemption and changing. The auditorium was still buzzing long after Sam left the stage. His words hung heavy in the air, not fading but echoing, repeating in the minds of everyone present. Poverty is not shameful, arrogance is. The boy had not just delivered a project. He had delivered a reckoning, one that struck deep into the conscience of every person watching, especially Ethan Carter. For the billionaire, who had built his empire on power, pride, and prestige, it felt as though someone had held up a mirror and forced him to confront the emptiness behind the wealth he worshipped. But even as the applause still rattled the hall, Victor Hayes was not ready to surrender. Rage simmered in his veins. To him, Sam's triumph was not inspiring. It was dangerous. Dangerous because it threatened to expose the lie that only privilege bred brilliance. Dangerous because it shifted the power away from the carefully constructed narrative Victor had controlled for years. He leaned toward Ethan, whispering harshly, "We cannot let this boy win. If we reward him, it undermines everything." When the news broke, gasps echoed across the auditorium. Journalists scrambled to capture the story, cameras flashing wildly. Victor tried to protest, but the evidence was overwhelming. Ethan stood, his face pale, fury and shame swirling together. As he turned on the man he had once trusted implicitly, "You would destroy a boy's life to protect your lies?" Ethan's voice boomed, louder than it had ever been. "You disgrace everything this foundation was meant to stand for." Guards escorted Victor out, his protests drowned by the storm of outrage that followed him. Then, with the entire room watching, Ethan did something no one expected. He walked slowly toward David Miller, who sat quietly in the back of the hall, hands folded tightly in his lap. The billionaire who had once humiliated him now stood before him with lowered eyes. Ethan's voice, stripped of its arrogance, was soft but carried through the silence. "David, I was wrong. I called you worthless, I mocked your son. But tonight I saw the truth. You are richer in spirit than I have ever been, and your son has shown the world a brilliance that money cannot buy. I am sorry." The apology, public and raw, drew stunned silence, followed by a swell of applause that shook the room. David, though humbled, did not gloat. He simply placed a steady hand on Ethan's shoulder and nodded. "Respect isn't something you're born into," he said quietly. "It's something you earn. Remember that." At last, the judges returned to announce their decision. Sam Miller was declared the winner of the Carter Foundation Scholarship, not out of pity, but because His work and his words had outshone every competitor. As the crowd erupted into cheers, David's eyes filled with tears not of shame, but of pride so fierce it made his heart ache. He reached for his son, pulling him into an embrace that told Sam more than words ever could. Ethan Carter stepped forward then, extending his hand not as a billionaire offering charity, but as a man humbled by truth. "Sam," he said, his voice steady, "you've changed the way I see the world. If you will allow it, I would like to support not just your education, but your vision to bring light to those who need it most." Sam shook his hand, but his answer was firm. "I'll accept the scholarship, but the vision? That's not just mine. It belongs to every child who's been told they're less because they were born with less. If you want to support it, then support them." His words drew yet another round of applause, this time thunderous, unstoppable. In the weeks that followed, Victor's downfall became front-page news, while Sam's victory became a symbol of hope. Donations poured into the foundation, not for prestige, but for change. A new program was launched to invest in underprivileged students, with Sam's name spoken as its inspiration. And in their small apartment, for the first time, David and Sam felt the weight of poverty lift, replaced not by riches, but by opportunity and respect. On the night of the award ceremony, as father and son walked home under the glow of street lamps, David placed his arm around Sam's shoulders. "You did it," he whispered. "You proved him wrong." Sam shook his head, a small smile on his lips. "No, Dad, we proved them wrong. Together." And with that they walked on, no longer bowed by humiliation, but standing tall, their bond unbreakable, their dignity unshakable, and their future brighter than the chandeliers in any billionaire's hall.